script here. I first learned about the practice of Zen when reading an article Maria Abito had written for Richard Rohr's Radical Grace newspaper. It was about practicing Zen while raising babies. If I had known that there was a group I could connect with back then, I probably would have joined a lot sooner. But either I missed the contact info to MKZC or they did not include it in the article. But I knew from that article that this Zen thing sounded interesting. And I also knew from that newspaper that Ruben periodically offered retreats in Albuquerque by the title Encounter of the Heart. And that sounded really appealing, though the timing never quite worked out for me to go to one. Years, maybe a decade passed, and I found myself in South Bend, Indiana, where I was working as a rector for the University of Notre Dame. The job was driving me crazy, so I asked my spiritual director if she could recommend a therapist. She did, and that was Tom Peterson. I had been working with Tom for a few months, and my dad's health took a turn. I did not know much about how therapy worked at the time, but I knew that I was going to need support while I was in Dallas with my family for the 4-week Christmas break that was coming up. And I knew Tom had just returned from Dallas. I had assumed he had gone to Dallas for a therapist conference, not imagining that he had a life beyond the clinical world. I asked him if he knew of any therapists in Dallas that I could see over the break, and he said, "No, but I know a Zen teacher." And I immediately knew who he was talking about and said, "Ruben Abito." He said, "Yes." And that was all I needed. The internet had been developed by then, so I Googled Ruben and found the MKZC website. I sent an email to help@mkzc.org and got the kindest reply from Helen Cortez. I was welcomed in with such warmth, and it was just what I needed. Those 4 weeks were tough with my dad's health, but I found great support and grounding by going to the Zendo almost daily and sitting with strangers who were so kind and welcoming. When I returned to South Bend, I was a little afraid to tell my therapist that I had been sitting with MKZC. I was afraid I had crossed a boundary that would make therapy messy. But Tom was great, and he said with delight, "You can come sit with us on Wednesday nights." And that's where I met Margaret, Tom's wife, and John, Tom's son, and so many other dear souls who sat at the Sophia Zen group. At the end of the sitting, Tom introduced me and said I had come from the mothership in Dallas. I decided to go to grad school, but needed to take a semester of prerequisite classes. So I moved back to Dallas to be with my family and sat with the group again, almost daily. When I moved to Chicago for grad school, I sat on my own every morning and every evening. It was such a comfort to have that support. And whenever I was in Dallas, I was at the Zendo on Honeycutt. The Skype world was just beginning, so Helen agreed to hold an orientation for a few classmates of mine up in Chicago. I will never forget that first time we Skyped with Helen. It was like she was right there with us. Magic. Our little group met for a couple of years. Helen offered Dokusan in one room, while the rest of us sat in my living room. And then we would move the computer into the living room so we could all chant and hear her closing words. It was unbelievable. Being a part of the Sangha has been such a gift in my life. I'm an extrovert, so I love to talk with people and to hear other people talk. But the silence of sitting in the presence of others who keep their own place, give space, and share in this path of life is really amazing. I'm sure there is some neuroscience explanation that involves the vagus nerve that tells us why this practice can be so healing. But even without scientific proof and explanations, I can tell you that it works. And as Ruben says, it's not the only path to healing, but it is a powerful complement. One of the biggest gifts this Sangha has given me is a place to grieve. In the beginning, I was grieving the decline of my father's health, and then his death, and then my mother's death. And all of the grief of the many transitions I've been through over the last 15 years. And my tears are okay here. At first, I did not think anyone was paying attention, but in a group discussion one night, when we were talking about selling the Honeycutt property, Carlo Angelo made a comment about sitting between two of the criers. I had no idea he knew I cried. I thought I was pretty good at keeping it to myself back then. But then I realized that I could be myself. I can be myself, as messy as that is at times. And I can have the space to go through it in the way that I need to, in the safety of others who are going through their own stuff too. And somehow that makes me feel less alone on this planet. Sometime after my parents had both passed away, Ruben was planning to be in the Philippines and was going to offer a session for the communities there. He extended an invitation to our Sangha members. Our community had for years sent a monetary gift to a group of school children under the direction of a friend of Ruben's, who was a Catholic sister. This trip offered us an opportunity to meet the children and Sister Josephine and to take a tour of their neighborhoods. The students and their parents were all there, and they had a program and then a celebration of food and drinks. It was impressive to hear their accomplishments and to see the different ages of students who had benefited from Sister Josephine's work. We also got to participate in a session at the ashram run by another one of Ruben's friends, Sister Esper. Sister Esper's community is amazing. They were so kind to us and so much fun to be with. After the session, they organized an immersion experience for us to meet people doing ministry in the area and to meet more students. One day we drove up a very steep mountain in a van packed together. Scott Thornton, Wenda Davis, Ramtin Nixad, and I had become so connected during this trip, we called ourselves an amoeba. We moved as one. The school building we visited was nothing more than walls, a roof, and a floor. There was a building for sleeping where the boys slept on the ground floor and the girls slept on the second floor. The kitchen was a sectioned off area where they had a fire and kept utensils. They had a garden, but the ground was so dry and hard, not much was growing. After we had lunch that Sister Esper's religious community had packed for us and the students performed for us. They had written a play about how the indigenous people had had their land taken from them. It was powerful. We did not understand the language, and I'm not even sure there were words, but I do remember the costumes and the beautiful children and the smiles and the care of the teachers. How these young people were able to do all of this was amazing. And after the play, we had a spontaneous dance party in the yard. It was really exhilarating. I remember one night at the ashram, we were sitting around sharing with our new friends from Sister Esper's group about why we practiced Zen. At the time, I was acutely aware of loneliness that I held and how the MKZC Sangha had helped me not feel so alone in the world. I shared something to that effect. Today, that painful loneliness has been healed through a lot of therapy and supported by Zen. But now that with this pandemic, there's a new kind of pain that comes from not being physically present with others in the way that I'm used to. And in our last session last weekend, I was able to sit deeply for a moment and see this loneliness and isolation from others for what it is. And it led me to a new perspective. It was a wake-up call. And I also experienced a peace that I have options and agency, and perhaps this profound isolation will be what it takes for me to seriously consider a co-housing community. I don't know if I will ever move into one, but just playing with the idea gives hope to my system and some clarity about why this pandemic has been such a challenge. I know we are never really alone. We are connected in very real ways, but I also know that my physical body needs to be around other physical bodies once in a while. I hope that it is not too much longer before we can be physically in the same space. But until then, I am deeply grateful for the technology that enables us to be together virtually. And deep bows of gratitude for Ruben for bringing this gift of Zen to Dallas, for the teachings of love, and for gathering together this community. And for Helen for all the work she does to keep us all connected. Thank you.
Let's prepare for chanting. All harmful karma ever committed by Eastern soul, on account of my beginnings as greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and consciousness, now I atone it all. The four vows of the Bodhisattva. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. The dark gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. The dark gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. The dark gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all Brahmins, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Mahaprajna Paramita.
Thank you so much, Katie, for sharing from your heart. And I thank everyone for being here tonight. This practice is really a great gift for all of us that connects us across our geographical distances. So we treasure this connection, and with every breath, we find our belonging to one another and to the whole world and to the universe, and empowers us to bear the pain and suffering of our fellow sentient beings so that we can live in a way that may be some way of a help in the alleviation of that suffering. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Katie, for really sharing of yourself and how you are living in that way, empowered by this shared practice of ours. Helen?